the event, the USMCA signing this morning, and you could see the president flagging certain Republicans at that event, giving them a little love. I'm curious what they're saying about the folks who are on the fence.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the White House is pressuring them to not want witnesses, just to not vote for witnesses. Remember, the president feels still very confident that he's going to be acquitted. But at this point, all their effort is about these witnesses, should they call them or not. And so they're trying to tell them all sorts of different things about why they shouldn't. And the latest thing that the White House has been telling senators is that, if you do call these witnesses, we will likely fight it. Obviously, the president can go and invoke an executive privilege. And it's a little bit unclear what will happen after that. Chief Justice John Roberts could rule, the Senate could vote on that, or the president could take this issue to court. And so their thinking is that if they say this will tie you up for weeks or months, that there are senators who will say, well, we definitely don't want that. They want to get back to legislative business. They want to get back on the campaign trail. And that's sort of the push that they've been making in the last couple of days.
Ricky, when you look at this from a legal perspective, these House managers, the president's White House counsel, what do you walk away with when you look at their legal strategy and how they've put this together? What questions do you think they should have at this point?
Well, I think in terms of questions, if I'm a Democratic senator, I want to go straight to the White House counsel and find out, did they know about the John Bolton manuscript? And if so, at what point in time, in light of the fact that they basically argued to this body of senators that there was no direct evidence of the president being involved in telling anyone about this quid pro quo. So that's what I want to know. I want to uncover that. Mm-hmm. If I'm asking questions of the House managers, I want to know about their necessity for...
Okay, so the White House is in absolute meltdown mode right now, and we're talking about something that could fundamentally reshape Trump's entire presidency before it even gets off the ground in his second term. Mark Meadows, Trump's former chief of staff, the guy who was literally in the room for everything during the most chaotic period of the first administration, has apparently revealed information so damaging, so catastrophic to Trump's legal and political standing, that members of Congress are now openly calling for him to step down before he's even fully consolidated power in 2025. This isn't some minor scandal that'll blow over in a news cycle. This is the kind of revelation that legal experts are saying could trigger everything from impeachment proceedings to criminal prosecutions to a full constitutional crisis about whether someone facing these kinds of allegations should be allowed to assume the presidency at all. And the timing here is absolutely brutal for Trump, because this is happening at the exact moment when he's supposed to be building his administration, securing his agenda, and projecting strength heading into what's already going to be a contentious relationship with Congress and the courts. Now, before we get into exactly what Meadows allegedly revealed and why this has Washington in complete chaos, I need to be straight with you about something. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. They're either going to downplay this because they don't want to seem biased, or they're going to sensationalize it without giving you the real constitutional and legal context you need to understand what's actually at stake here. That's why we built this channel, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines and understand what's really happening in Washington before everyone else is talking about it, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day, breaking down exactly what these power plays mean for the country, for the institutions, and for your life. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing here, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth, because that's what this is really about, making sure you have the information you need when institutions are under this kind of pressure. All right, let's get back to the video. Here's what happened. According to multiple reports that have been circulating through Washington over the past several days, Mark Meadows, who served as Trump's chief of staff during the final and most tumultuous year of his first term, has provided information to investigators, and potentially to members of Congress, that directly implicates Trump in activities that legal scholars are describing as potentially criminal. We're not talking about the kind of gray area stuff that politicians argue about on cable news. We're talking about information that reportedly involves deliberate efforts to overturn the 2020 election results, coordination with individuals who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, possible obstruction of justice in multiple ongoing investigations, and the use of executive powers in ways that several constitutional law professors have said amount to abuses of office that were specifically contemplated by the framers when they wrote the impeachment clauses. Meadows was in the room for all of it. He was on the phone calls. He was at the meetings. He saw the planning sessions. He knows who said what to whom and when they said it. And if even half of what's being reported about what he's revealed is accurate, this is the kind of testimony that doesn't just damage Trump politically. It potentially exposes him to serious legal jeopardy on multiple fronts, federal and state, criminal and civil, in ways that could follow him for the rest of his life. Now, here's where this gets even more intense. Members of Congress, including some Republicans who have been generally supportive of Trump, or at least reluctant to openly break with him, are reportedly so alarmed by what Meadows has allegedly disclosed that they're now privately and in some cases publicly calling for Trump to step aside, not just to face the music legally, but to actually withdraw from assuming the presidency again in 2025. The reasoning, according to sources on Capitol Hill, is that if Trump takes office while facing the kind of allegations that Meadows' testimony apparently supports, it will paralyze the government, destroy any remaining credibility the United States has with allies, make it impossible to govern effectively, and potentially trigger a constitutional crisis that makes Watergate look like a minor ethics violation. Some members are apparently arguing that the responsible thing, the patriotic thing, would be for Trump to step aside voluntarily, allow the Republican Party to move forward with someone else, and deal with his legal issues as a private citizen, rather than dragging the entire country through what could be years of investigations, impeachment proceedings, court battles, and institutional chaos. And this is where it gets really complicated, because Trump has shown absolutely no indication that he's willing to do that. In fact, people close to him are saying he views any suggestion that he stepped down as a betrayal, as weakness, as letting his enemies win. So you've got this collision course between members of Congress who are genuinely worried about the stability of the government, and a former president who seems absolutely determined to fight this all the way, no matter what it costs. And this is where things start to unravel in ways that go way beyond Trump himself, because what Meadows has reportedly revealed isn't just about Trump's actions. It's about the entire ecosystem of people around him. The advisors who allegedly encouraged him to pursue certain strategies, the lawyers who provided legal cover for plans that are now being described as potentially unlawful, the political operatives who coordinated messaging and logistics, the members of Congress who may have been aware of or even involved in some of these efforts. If Meadows is providing a detailed account of who knew what and when they knew it, this could implicate dozens of people across the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, the Republican National Committee, and even sitting members of Congress. And that's why you're seeing this panic mode response from certain quarters, because people are realizing that this isn't just a Trump problem, it's potentially a Republican Party problem, a Congress problem, and a problem for anyone who was anywhere near the center of power during that period. But it gets worse. The legal implications of what Meadows has allegedly disclosed are staggering. Let's talk about what could actually be at stake here legally. First, if Meadows has provided evidence that Trump knowingly attempted to overturn a legitimate election result through illegal means, that potentially implicates several federal statutes, including conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of an official proceeding, and potentially seditious conspiracy if the evidence shows coordination with groups that used violence to try to stop the certification of the election. These aren't minor charges. Conspiracy to defraud the United States carries a potential sentence of up to 5 years in prison. Obstruction of an official proceeding can carry up to 20 years. Seditious conspiracy, if prosecutors can make that case, can carry up to 20 years as well. And these are just the federal charges. There are also state-level investigations in places like Georgia and potentially other jurisdictions that could bring their own charges based on what Meadows reveals. Second, if Meadows has testified that Trump obstructed justice in the various investigations that have been conducted into his conduct, both while he was in office and after he left, that's a separate set of potential charges. Obstruction of justice is what ultimately forced Nixon to resign. It's what led to one of the impeachment articles against Clinton. It's taken very seriously by prosecutors because it goes to the heart of whether our legal system can function. If a president or former president can obstruct investigations into their own conduct with impunity, then the rule of law doesn't mean anything. and Meadows would have had a front-row seat to any efforts to interfere with investigations, to pressure witnesses, to hide or destroy evidence, to use executive privilege inappropriately to shield information from investigators. He's now cooperating with authorities and providing detailed accounts of those efforts. That's devastating for Trump's legal position. Third, there's the constitutional dimension. The framers of the Constitution were absolutely terrified of the possibility that someone would try to use the presidency to overturn the democratic process, to hold on to power through illegal means, to turn the executive branch into a tool for personal or political gain rather than for the public good. That's why they included impeachment provisions. That's why they separated powers between the branches. That's why they built in checks and balances. If what Meadows has allegedly revealed shows that Trump attempted to do exactly what the framers feared most, to use executive power to subvert democracy itself, then we're talking about conduct that goes to the very core of what the impeachment power was designed to address. And that's why some constitutional scholars are saying that even if Trump is no longer in office for his first term, if he's about to assume office again, Congress has not just the right, but arguably the duty to use whatever constitutional tools are available to prevent someone who allegedly engaged in that kind of conduct from wielding executive power again. Now, here's the key thing to understand about Mark Meadows and why his cooperation is so significant. Meadows wasn't some low-level staffer. He wasn't someone on the periphery who might have glimpsed parts of what was happening. He was the White House Chief of Staff, literally the most senior advisor to the president, the person who controlled access to the Oval Office, who was in charge of implementing the president's agenda, who was involved in virtually every major decision. If you wanted to get to Trump, you went through Meadows. If Trump wanted something done, he told Meadows. This means Meadows has direct first-hand knowledge of Trump's decision-making process, his intentions, his instructions to subordinates, his reactions when he was told that certain actions might be illegal or unconstitutional. In legal terms, Meadows is what prosecutors call a percipient witness, someone who was actually present and can testify to what they personally saw and heard, not what they think happened or what someone told them happened. That kind of testimony is incredibly powerful in court and in congressional proceedings because it's very hard to dispute. Trump can say Meadows is lying, but if Meadows has contemporaneous notes, if he has text messages, if he has emails, if there are other witnesses who can corroborate his account, then his testimony becomes very difficult to overcome. And here's where the political calculation gets really brutal for Republicans in Congress. They're looking at a situation where they have to decide whether to stand by Trump in the face of what could be overwhelming evidence of serious misconduct, or whether to cut their losses and try to salvage what they can of the party's credibility and electoral prospects. If they stand by Trump, and it turns out that the allegations are as serious as they appear, they risk going down with the ship, being forever associated with someone who potentially tried to overthrow democratic processes, facing voters in 2026 who are furious that they enabled this. If they break with Trump, they risk a massive backlash from his base, primary challenges from MAGA candidates, potentially splitting the Republican Party in ways that could cost them elections for years. It's a lose-lose situation, and that's why you're seeing this desperate scramble to try to convince Trump to step aside voluntarily, because that would give them a way out, a way to move on without having to explicitly repudiate him. But Trump isn't playing along. According to people close to him, he views this as yet another witch hunt, yet another attempt by his enemies to take him down, and he's absolutely determined to fight it. He's telling advisors that he's not going to give his opponents the satisfaction of seeing him quit, that he's going to go down swinging if he has to go down at all, that the people who elected him deserve to have him fight for them no matter what Congress or the courts say. And there's a certain logic to that from his perspective. Trump's entire political brand is built on defiance, on fighting the establishment, on refusing to back down. If he were to step aside now, it would be completely out of character, and his supporters might see it as betrayal. So he's calculating that his best move is to fight, to attack the credibility of Meadows, to claim that this is all politically motivated, to rally his base around the narrative that he's being persecuted, and to force Congress and the courts to take him down if they're going to take him down, rather than giving them an easy victory. Okay, let's break down what this actually means, because this is where it becomes a lot bigger than just Trump's legal problems or his political future. First, Understand that we're potentially looking at a scenario where the United States has a president-elect who is facing credible allegations of criminal conduct, serious enough that members of his own party are calling for him to step aside. That has never happened in American history. We've had presidents resign under pressure like Nixon. We've had presidents impeached, like Clinton and Trump himself in his first term. We've had presidents who lost elections and stepped aside gracefully, but we've never had a situation where someone won an election, is preparing to take office, and is simultaneously facing this level of legal and political pressure to withdraw. The constitutional implications are staggering because there's no clear mechanism for what happens if a president-elect steps aside or is forced out before inauguration. Does the vice president-elect become president? Does the party nominate someone else? Does Congress have a role? The Constitution doesn't really address this scenario in detail, and that means we could be in completely uncharted territory. Second, this raises fundamental questions about accountability and the rule of law. One of the core principles of American democracy is that no one is above the law, not even the president. But we've also never really tested what happens when the legal system and the political system collide in this way. If prosecutors believe they have evidence of serious crimes, can they indict a president-elect? Can they indict a sitting president? The Department of Justice has a long-standing policy that sitting presidents can't be indicted, but that policy has never been tested in court, and it doesn't clearly address presidents-elect. If Congress believes there's evidence of impeachable conduct, can they impeach someone before they take office? Or do they have to wait until they're actually sworn in? These are not just academic questions. These are live issues that could determine whether our institutions can actually hold powerful people accountable, or whether there are effectively ways to be beyond the reach of the law if you're politically powerful enough. Third, think about what this means for America's credibility on the world stage. Our allies are already nervous about a second Trump term because of the chaos and unpredictability of his first term. Now imagine that he takes office while facing allegations of attempting to overturn democratic processes and potentially facing criminal charges. How are European leaders supposed to trust someone in that position? How are agreements supposed to be negotiated? How is the United States supposed to lecture other countries about democracy and the rule of law when we can't even agree on whether our own president allegedly violated those principles? This is the kind of thing that adversaries like Russia and China absolutely love, because it makes the United States look weak, divided, and hypocritical. It undermines our ability to lead international coalitions, to maintain alliances, to project power and credibility. And that has real consequences for everything from NATO to trade agreements, to our ability to counter authoritarianism globally. Fourth, think about the political ramifications heading into the 2026 midterms. If Trump is in office and facing ongoing investigations, potential impeachment, and constant legal battles, that becomes the only story in American politics. Every day will be about the latest development in the investigations, the latest court filing, the latest congressional hearing. The Republican agenda, whatever it might be, will be completely overshadowed. Republican candidates in competitive districts will be asked constantly whether they support Trump, whether they believe the allegations, whether they think he should resign. Democratic candidates will make the entire election a referendum on Trump and on the Republicans who enabled him. And if the revelations keep getting worse, if more evidence comes out, if more people cooperate with investigators, Republicans could be looking at a catastrophic electoral wipeout, losing the House, losing more Senate seats, losing governorships and state legislatures because voters will be so disgusted by the whole spectacle. Fifth, consider the impact on governance. Even setting aside the legal and political drama, the basic business of government becomes almost impossible in this environment. How is Congress supposed to pass a budget when half the debate is about whether the president should be impeached? How are cabinet nominees supposed to get confirmed when every hearing becomes a referendum on the president's conduct? How are federal agencies supposed to function when career employees don't know whether the administration will even survive? How are businesses supposed to make investment decisions when they don't know whether the government will be stable? This kind of chaos has real costs. It means important policies don't get addressed. It means economic uncertainty increases. It means problems that need solutions get ignored because everyone is focused on the crisis of the day. And here's the absolutely critical thing that people need to understand. This isn't just about Mark Meadows' testimony. This is about the broader pattern of accountability finally catching up with actions that occurred years ago. For a long time, Trump has been able to avoid serious consequences for conduct that would have ended anyone else's career, partly because of his political power, partly because of the complexity of the legal issues, partly because institutions moved slowly and cautiously. But there's only so long that can continue. Eventually, if the allegations are serious enough and the evidence is strong enough, institutions have to respond, or they lose all credibility. And it appears that we may be reaching that point. Prosecutors have been methodically building cases. Congressional investigators have been gathering evidence. Witnesses have been cooperating. And now, all of that is potentially coming to a head at the exact moment when Trump is about to assume power again. The collision between those two forces, Trump's return to the presidency and the legal and political accountability for past conduct, is what's creating this unprecedented crisis. Now let's talk about what could happen next, because there are several possible scenarios, and they're all pretty dramatic. In one scenario, the pressure on Trump becomes so intense, from Congress, from Republican Party leaders, from donors, from legal advisors who are telling him his situation is hopeless, that he makes a calculation that stepping aside is actually his best move. Maybe he negotiates some kind of deal where he withdraws in exchange for certain protections or assurances. Maybe he decides that he'd rather go out on his own terms than be forced out through impeachment or criminal conviction. Maybe he concludes that fighting is going to cost him everything, his freedom, his wealth, his legacy, and that withdrawing now preserves something. If that happens, it would be the biggest political earthquake in modern American history, and it would throw the Republican Party into complete chaos as they scramble to figure out who becomes president instead. In another scenario, Trump refuses to step aside. He fights all the way, and Congress has to decide whether to impeach and remove him. That would require a majority in the House to impeach, which Democrats might have depending on the composition of the House, and 2/3 of the Senate to convict and remove, which would require significant Republican support. Based on past impeachments, getting that Republican support would be extraordinarily difficult unless the evidence is absolutely overwhelming and the political pressure is unbearable. But if Meadows' testimony is as damaging as reported, and if more witnesses come forward, and if the evidence keeps mounting, there could reach a point where even Republican senators conclude that they have no choice. And if Trump were to be impeached and removed, that would be absolutely historic. A president removed from office for the first time in American history. In a third scenario, prosecutors move forward with criminal charges. If the Department of Justice concludes that the evidence supports criminal charges, and if they decide that the public interest requires prosecution regardless of the political consequences, they could seek indictments. That would trigger a massive legal battle over whether a sitting president can be indicted, whether he can be prosecuted while in office, whether he can pardon himself, and a dozen other constitutional questions that have never been definitively answered. It would probably go to the Supreme Court, and the court would have to decide whether to allow the prosecution to proceed. Depending on how they rule, we could end up with a president who is simultaneously running the country and defending himself in criminal court, which would be absolutely surreal and unprecedented. In a fourth scenario, none of the worst-case outcomes happen. Maybe the evidence isn't as strong as the leaks suggest. Maybe Meadows' testimony has weaknesses that become apparent. Maybe prosecutors decide that the legal and political obstacles to prosecution are too high. Maybe Congress decides that impeachment would be too divisive and opts for censure or other symbolic measures. Maybe Trump weathers the storm the way he's weathered previous storms, by attacking his accusers, rallying his base, and waiting for the news cycle to move on. It's possible. Trump has survived things that would have destroyed other politicians. But the difference this time is that the allegations appear to be much more serious, the evidence appears to be much stronger, and the institutional pressure appears to be much more intense than anything he's faced before. So here's the bottom line. We are potentially witnessing the beginning of the most serious constitutional and legal crisis in modern American history. If Mark Meadows has indeed provided testimony that implicates Trump in criminal conduct and abuses of power, and if members of Congress are so concerned that they're calling for him to step aside, then we're in territory that the framers of the Constitution contemplated but that we've never actually had to navigate. The next few weeks and months are going to determine whether our institutions can handle this kind of stress test, whether accountability is actually possible for someone at the highest levels of power, and whether the American political system can survive this kind of crisis intact. This is not hyperbole. This is not exaggeration. This is a genuine test of whether the rule of law and democratic norms still mean something in the United States. And whatever happens, it's going to reshape American politics for a generation. The decisions that are made right now, by prosecutors, by members of Congress, by Trump himself, by Republican Party leaders, by the courts, are going to define what's permissible and what's not, what the limits of presidential power are, and what happens when those limits are allegedly violated. Keep your eyes on this story, because this is far from over, and what happens next could literally determine the future of the American presidency and the stability of American democracy for decades to come. This is one of those moments where history is being made in real time, and we're all watching it unfold.